And a very special welcome to our viewers in Grenada who are watching us on WPG 10. I'm Saini Gray. The presidential race in Colombia is growing more intense as some polls show the left-wing candidate, Gustavo Petro, closing the gap on the front-runner, Ivan Duque. According to the Latin American Strategic Center of Geopolitics, CELAG, the right-wing candidate's lead is down to just 5.5%. It puts Ivan Duque on 45.5% and Gustavo Petro on 40%. The survey was done before Antonas Mocas and Claudia Lopez from the Green Party announced their support for the left-wing candidate. Other polls still give Duque a lead of between 10 and 20%. And Gustavo Petro is seeking to gather more support for the second round on Sunday. Petro has sent a letter to Humberto de la Calle, the former Liberal candidate and chief negotiator of the peace process with the FARC. He invited him to, quote, fight together to prevent the country from returning to the trap of war and violence. So far, de la Calle has said he will cast a blank vote in the runoff. And as Colombians prepare for the second round of elections, let's take a look at the issue of public safety in the country.
As Colombia's presidential runoff draws closer, social movements remember the serious human rights violations that were committed under past governments.
Young people who were taken with false promises of work, and then they show up as killed in combat.
They also remember that between 2002 and 2010, more than 10,000 extrajudicial executions were reported.
It was within the framework of the so-called democratic security that there were widespread arbitrary detentions and extrajudicial executions. There were orders straight from the Defense Ministry and obviously the presidency.
Serious human rights violations were added to these state crimes.
During Uribe's time, there were more than 1,000 attacks on human rights activists, going from threats to murders.
Another criticism made of Uribe's government was the increase in paramilitary activity.
When Uribe was the governor of Antioquia, paramilitary groups grew dramatically. In the end, there were more than 100 of them.
Now, many former members of Uribe's cabinet are being investigated for their links to paramilitary groups.
Mayor Santoyo, Uribe's head of security, is now in jail in the United States, and not only for drug trafficking, but also for his active collaboration with paramilitary groups. And like him, we could also mention many of his ministers and senators, and others close to former President Uribe.
Campesinos, indigenous people, and social leaders are concerned not only that Álvaro Uribe Vélez is behind the candidacy of Ivan Duque, but also the endorsement of corrupt political groups.
Duque has brought together the traditional political class, and the most corrupt parties are not ashamed or publicly expressing their support for him. Duque has said publicly that he will intercede directly in the judicial process, and that he intends to eliminate the high courts.
Social movements and human rights activists hope the new president of Colombia will fight to prevent the violence from getting worse.
The worst thing that the country can do is to return to paramilitary groups taking over Colombia.
A week ago, the Supreme Court of Justice declared the massacres of San Roque, El Haro, and La Granja as crimes against humanity. Crimes in which Álvaro Uribe, who was then governor of Antioquia, is facing a preliminary investigation.
And ahead of the election on Sunday, the National Liberation Army, or ELN, has announced a ceasefire for the coming weekend. In a statement, the country's largest remaining guerrilla group said the truce will facilitate the participation of Colombians in the second round of the presidential election. The ceasefire starts on Friday and will end on Tuesday, June 19th. Talks between the Colombian government and the armed group are seeking to establish a new bilateral ceasefire. At least 3 more people were killed in Nicaragua over the weekend as violence continued between opposition groups, the police, and government supporters. The opposition set up more barricades and fired homemade mortars at the security forces. 2 of the victims died during confrontations in Managua and the northern city of Jinoteca. The 3rd victim was a man in his 60s who died after a bullet struck his heart in the city of Masaya. The opposition groups are demanding the removal of President Daniel Ortega. The Nicaraguan police say that violence is being spread by organized groups who are committing acts of terrorism against Nicaraguans. In a press statement, the security forces report that these groups are armed with firearms, mortar shells, and Molotov cocktails. The Nicaraguan police ask for respect for life as well as public and private property, and say they will work for peace and security. President Daniel Ortega is expected to give his answer shortly to a proposal made by the Episcopal Conference on how to restart a dialogue in Nicaragua. The bishops and the Nicaraguan president met behind closed doors last week to discuss an agenda for the talks between the government and the opposition, in which the Catholic Church has been acting as mediator. However, many Sandinista supporters say the Church has been supporting the opposition. According to unofficial figures, the political crisis in Nicaragua has left at least 138 people dead since mid-April. And our correspondent in Managua, Maria Jose Diaz, brings us more.
Nicaragua continues to live in a tense atmosphere. As a response to the violence, social movements and organizations made a call on Sunday for a Twitter storm in favor of peace in Nicaragua. Citizens and families from other parts of the world joined this call to put an end to the violence promoted by opposition groups. Some countries have made a call for dialogue as a mechanism to bring normality back to the country. Also, thousands of Catholic and evangelical Nicaraguans gathered to pray for peace in Nicaragua. The National Police reported that during the night on Sunday, armed groups attacked for over 3 hours the police headquarters in the municipality of Cebaco, Matagalpa, with guns, mortars, and Molotov cocktails, leaving 2 people injured by bullets. In Nueva Guinea, in the south, the hospital was looted. 1 ambulance and 3 motorbikes were stolen. On the other hand, demonstrations keep going on across the country, which are disturbing the life of the Nicaraguan population, which is asking for stability in the nation.
The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, is presenting her new government's budget. Last week, a delegation from the International Monetary Fund urged Barbados to cut public spending, including state pensions, in order to address the country's acute financial problems. Mottley was elected last month on a promise to protect public services and restore free university education. And that budgetary session is now underway. These are live pictures from the parliamentary chamber in Bridgetown, where Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who is also the Minister of Finance, is presenting the annual financial statement or national budget. Let's listen in.
That is humbling. In near 40 hours of face-to-face meetings with the social partnership in the last 10 days, and I apologize to their families for encroaching and trespassing upon their time. We've agreed upon the mission and the steps to be taken as we go forward. We agreed on the need to save the Barbados dollar. We called in the International Monetary Fund as a government to assist us in providing liquidity support for our international reserves and to provide an independent assessment, and never let us forget the virtue of it, an independent assessment of our recovery and transformation plan so that all of our domestic and external stakeholders could garner and gain confidence. We've also moved to restructure the debt for the reasons that I've already given to the country. It is now my duty, sir, to call upon all Barbadians, and I mean all Barbadians, to play their part in the rescuing.
Prime Minister of Barbados there, Mia Mottley. Now, Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of Chilean Bishop Juan Barrios and 2 others accused of covering up sexual abuse perpetrated by the priest Fernando Caradima. One of Caradima's victims, Juan Carlos Cruz, said on Twitter, "This is a new beginning for the Catholic Church in Chile, and that he is excited for all of those who fought to see this day come." In May, 34 bishops of the Episcopal Conference of Chile offered to resign after a 3-day meeting with the Pope. Time now for a short break, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Rescue operations have resumed in Guatemala's southern village of San Miguel Los Lotes, one of the most affected after the eruption of the Fuego volcano. Rescue teams from Mexico and other countries have joined local residents in the search for their loved ones, still buried under ash and mud. The search operations were suspended on Wednesday afternoon, but the National Coordination for Disaster Reduction said the conditions are now suitable for the recovery teams to resume their work. The small town of San Miguel Los Lotes is now known as Ground Zero. The Fuego volcanic eruption has left at least 109 people dead and nearly 200 missing. And communities isolated during the eruption of the Fuego volcano have started to worry about a long period of shortages. Let's hear from Santiago Bouton, who has the story.
After the disaster, families that lived in the faults of the Fuego volcano have stated that there will be no peace for them, saying that their crops were buried.
We are very worried about how we're going to eat, because right now this area of cornfields is totally destroyed.
Small coffee producers who belong to the agriculture cooperative Union Jusita say that they lost most of their crops.
We are calculating that the loss will be between 15 and 18 million kilograms of mature crops in this harvest, and this is the biggest source of income for the community as a cooperative. We are deeply worried.
Farmers said that Mount Fuego erupted a mixture of sand, sulfur, and ash, forming a resistant layer that would take a few years to dissolve.
This mixture of sand and sulfur forms a very strong cap, and people are right in saying that it seems like cement. All the organic material was buried, so it will be difficult for the earth to begin producing again.
The victims filed for technical and economic assistance to recover their lost belongings.
The assistance can come directly from any organization that is able to distribute it. But it should not come in the name of the government, because the government will just take it.
In the weeks since the eruption of Mount Fuego, the victims continue waiting for any state proposal for a reconstruction program.
Former Panamanian President Ricardo Martinelli has been extradited from the United States to Panama. Martinelli was transferred from a federal prison in Miami to Panama, where he arrived just over an hour ago. The former president is accused of ordering that over 150 people, including journalists and politicians, be spied upon. The former president is also under investigation for 20 other cases of corruption not referred to in the extradition request. Martinelli was president of Panama from 2009 to 2014. And a judge in El Salvador has decided to keep the trial of the former president, Mauricio Funes, confidential. Funes, along with 31 other people, is allegedly linked to a money laundering network that diverted $351 million from the public budget. The former Salvadorian president is also accused of covering up various illicit acts during his government. Now the court has said the case against him will not be made public to protect witnesses. Funes ruled the Central American country from 2009 to 2014 and has been in exile in Nicaragua since September 2016. The issue of abortion is dividing Argentina as Congress prepares to vote on a bill to legalize it on Wednesday. Feminist movements have been demonstrating for weeks in support of the bill, but the Catholic Church has opposed any liberalization of the law. Activists say that religious leaders have been putting pressure on 30 congressmen who are still undecided on how to vote. Congress has heard the opinions of doctors, activists, teachers, and other experts ahead of the vote. The Chilean government has withdrawn a project that sought to make amends with the survivors of torture during the dictatorship, but now the government intends to pardon the torturers, sparking protests.
Joan Jara, the widow of singer-songwriter Victor Jara, tortured and killed during the Pinochet dictatorship, has had to live through the pain and helplessness. Family and survivors of the most horrific crimes are now seeing the murderers of their loved ones and even their own torturers enjoying impunity. Veronica de Negrini knows it well. The mother of the photographer Rodrigo Rojas, burned alive by agents of the dictator, was also tortured. She survived, but more than 4 decades have elapsed, and justice has yet to catch up with the torturers.
I looked at them and watched them, and my eyes were running. 42 years after I was tortured by these fools. Pardon the expression, but at this point I don't know what to call them. Criminals, cowards, that with the power of weapons, they felt the right to massacre us.
The adherents of Pinochet have seemingly had a revival in the right-wing government of Sebastián Piñera. They pay homage to those who acted under Pinochet, treating them as the country's heroes, and even discuss pardoning the older or sick criminals.
Today, it is more urgent than ever to legislate against this immorality that has allowed governments or the political class insofar as these criminals are able to release books and occupy spaces, legalizing what was state terrorism in the country.
One of Pinochet's fiercest criminals, Alberto Cobalan, launched his memoir at the Crown Plaza Hotel. He's serving more than 100 years in prison, but his supporters celebrate, while victims protest outside. He released his memoirs as if that were not enough. The government withdrew a bill from Congress that sought to make amends with the victims of torture. There were more than 40,000, of which 10,000 have already died without justice. The Minister of Justice, Hernán Larraín, was questioned in the Chamber of Deputies.
We are talking about the reparations for the victims of a state that maltreated, which tortured, in which people were disappeared, and which executed people.
The House is set to ask the government to revive the project, but the Minister of Justice's track record sows doubts. In his time as a senator in the 90s, he defended an area in which accomplices of Pinochet held a torture camp, the same place where today graves have been uncovered with remains of disappeared detainees.
Thousands of Puerto Ricans rallied on Sunday in favor of independence and the decolonization of the island. Protesters in the capital city of San Juan also criticized the austerity measures of the governor, Ricardo Rosselló, and the lack of basic services such as water and electricity that still affects thousands of people since Hurricane Maria. Demonstrators also asked the government to stop the current privatization process of these services. The pro-independence leader, Oscar Lopez Rivera, called on Puerto Ricans to start building a new and free nation. We're going to take another short break, but join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Spain's Prime Minister has agreed to take in a stranded rescue ship in the Mediterranean waters after Italy and Malta refused it entry. The Aquarius is carrying over 600 migrants, including pregnant women and children. It had been adrift, but Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez confirmed they'll allow the ship to dock at Valencia to avoid a humanitarian disaster. Diplomats from the United States and North Korea have been meeting ahead of a landmark summit between their leaders, President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, in Singapore on Tuesday. Both sides are trying to minimize the differences before the two leaders sit down together to discuss substantial issues of normalizing their relations. The United States has said it wants the complete denuclearization of North Korea, while for Kim, the main concern is whether the U.S. could really end its hostile policy and guarantee the security of his government if the country gets rid of its nuclear program. And our correspondent in Beijing, Isiara Diaz, has the latest on the much-awaited summit.
There is a lot of expectation surrounding this meeting between North Korea and the United States. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un arrived in Singapore first and was welcomed by the country's foreign minister, Vivian Balakrishnan. He also welcomed U.S. President Donald Trump later on. Both leaders have already met with Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, who thanked them for arranging all the final details of this long-awaited summit, and said he is sure that the world has high hopes of the historic meeting between the United States and North Korea. Kim Jong-un is accompanied by his foreign minister and one of the officials who recently visited the United States. Donald Trump traveled with his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his security advisor. Meanwhile, Pope Francis has said he hopes this meeting can bring the possibility of reaching peace on the Korean Peninsula. More than 2,500 journalists have arrived to Singapore to cover the summit.
And a war of words between Trump and his Canadian counterpart, Justin Trudeau, continues post-G7. Here's more on that and a look at the other stories making headlines.
Even after the G7 summit is over, a war of words between US President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over trade tariffs has continued. In his latest move, Trump took to Twitter to attack Trudeau and called fair trade fool trade. A suicide bomber in Afghanistan has killed 13 people and injured more than 20 at the entrance of the Rural Rehabilitation and Development Ministry in Kabul. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack. The strike comes as security in the city has slipped ahead of the elections due in October. In Romania, around 3,000 protesters have gathered in the Bucharest Victory Square to demand an end to state corruption, just a day after a pro-government rally against anti-corruption prosecutors. The latest protests call for the governing centre-left Social Democratic Party to resign and lit up the evening with mobile phones. Courts in the country recently approved the dismissal of Laura Kövesi, chief anti-corruption prosecutor. Government supporters believed she had too much power and had abused her time in office.
Step down, you rats, you prowlers, step down, down with the red flag, submit your resignation.
Saudi Arabia is hosting a four-nation summit in the holy city of Mecca. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman welcome their counterparts from the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and the UAE have offered Jordan $2.5 billion in aid to ease the economic crisis after a spate of anti-austerity protests in the country recently.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media for Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Talis Your English, I'm Sonie Gray. Thank you so much for watching.